Yes, people. Thank you for your patience, first and foremost. And also, thank you for joining us in Mimm Studios. Just to give you a perspective of what we're kicking off over the next year, this is a project called Let's Build Fam. It's going to be a 10-series project where we work with grassroots music promoters, and they're going to invite their own genres. So it's going to be a multi-genre kind of situation, but we're kind of focusing on the global sounds of the world. But I'm kicking off this first episode, and obviously I've been blessed with the presence of the man himself. But this particular project that I'm working on is called Our Yard. And Our Yard is the exploration into sound system culture over the last 50, 60 years, and to try and push the positive impact of immigration and try and kind of change the current rhetoric of what immigration is. So that's kind of what I'm focusing on personally. But I hope that you guys can join us in the future for the other events that we're going to be doing, which will be different promoters, but different genres. But I really wish that you can come through to them, and I'll talk on that a little bit later. But first and foremost, introduce yourself, sir.
My name is Dennis Bovell. Oh, thank you. Glad to see you all. A word of advice, though. If you're traveling in the back of a taxi, put your seatbelt on, because on the way here, without looking, the taxi stopped suddenly, and I was sprawled out across everything, bashing my face on the chair in front, right? And I thought, turn the microphone down a bit, it's a bit feeding back there. Yeah.
Spoken like a true producer.
Yeah, and put a bit of treble on, because my voice is quite deep.
Yeah. Give me a little bit more.
Yeah, I'll tell you how to tone me up, brother. So yeah, just a word of advice, right? Because it says put your seatbelt on even if you're sitting in the back, and I didn't do that. And I nearly wasn't here as a result because I smacked my face and I wanted to kill somebody. Anyway, it didn't happen, so I'm here.
I calmed him down.
Took him
off the edge.
It calmed me down, see?
Got him a little whiskey.
A little drop of whiskey there does the trick every time. In fact, I learned the whiskey trick from a man called Stefan Grappelli. He's a very famous violinist. And when he was faced with being asked how he overcame cramps in his fingers, he said, you see that glass over there, tot of whiskey? And that was my excuse. I mean, touring around the world with Linton Kwesi Johnson, he'd go, what you got that on there for? I went, for cramps. So, welcome.
So let's start off early years. We're going way back.
Go. My memory's still intact.
Yeah. So we're going Barbados.
Oh, yeah.
Tell me a little bit about the music that were around you, your family members, and the influences they had on you as a youth back in the day.
Well, in Barbados, I come from a musical family. Everybody reads music, but that was never their job. They're all academics, right? Like professor of mathematics, science professor, professor of economics, all that, you know. And so when I said, well, I'm going to be a musician, they looked at me funny. It was like, you're going to do what? And my dad said, well, I don't know any rich musicians. And I said, that's because you don't know the Beatles. And you don't know Stevie Wonder, right? And you don't know Ray Charles, right? He's going, well, all the musicians I know end up broke, penniless. He said, if you pursue this musical career, you'll probably never eat a decent meal in a proper restaurant. So I thought, yeah, every record I've made my dad a copy of it. And he's the only person that's got every record I've ever made. And he won't lend them to me. Anyway, my granddad was a music teacher. And he taught music to the local lads and lasses. And my dad went there to learn music. And he met Mom. and I'm the first production. So I decided, hey, it was music that made me, come to be. So I must be a musician. So when I started playing the guitar, my dad was like, if you don't get good results at school, I'm going to smash that guitar. We had a big, lovely fire in the living room. He was going, your guitar is going on there. So I had to toe the line and, do my exams and pass them as well. But since I've left school, no one's ever asked me how many A-levels or O-levels I've had because I've been a musician. Anyway, Granddad was the choir master of some Christians calling themselves the Seventh-day Adventists. And it's a bit like Judaism. They go to church on a Saturday. So Friday night is the Sabbath. And on Saturday, there was not any other music allowed in the house other than gospel. My mum's younger brother, however, he favored playing in a calypso band. My granddad didn't take kindly to that. And in fact, he told him, you playing calypso? Where do you live? Can you get yourself an apartment as well? Because you're not staying in my house playing that devil's music. But we made it. He moved to Canada and survived there until his death about 4 years ago. And he was my guitar tutor. And I took up playing the guitar primarily so that I could show off at church. In the afternoon service, there was a young people's meeting where the youngsters of the church had their own gathering. And then I would quite frequently volunteer to play and sing there.
How old were you at this time?
I was 8.
So you were on the guitar 8 years old?
Yeah.
Yeah.
My first song was, oh, when the saints go marching in. Oh, when the saints go marching in. Yeah.
Classic. So what was the reason for you to come over to the UK? Like, what was the scenario? Obviously, you were back home with your grandparents.
Mm-hmm. My parents lived here.
In the UK?
Yeah, my dad was a bus driver.
Okay, so
my mum
obviously
worked for the NHS, as a lot of Caribbean people. And I didn't consider that I was emigrating. Because when I was born, Barbados was a British colony. And I was given a British citizenship. When I left Barbados at the age of 12, I was merely relocating within the UK. Because Barbados was not yet an independent place. It's now a republic after becoming independent in 1966. And on the 21st century, on the day after we were celebrating independence, our Prime Minister declared that Barbados was now a republic, and not to be known as the Republic of Barbados, but just as Barbados. I've written a tune for that, and this August they're going to be subjected to it. So at the age of 12, my dad decided that I was going to relocate to London, a thing which I didn't hold with because I thought, it snows there. And I detest the winter. Sorry. It's not your fault. But I'd rather be hot and take something off than be cold and have to put layer upon layer upon layer on. And I detested having to play football in the winter when it's freezing cold, 22 people chasing a ball that only one of them can kick at any time. And also when it was raining, falling in the mud and getting myself muddy, and rugby as well. I detested both of them and decided to play golf. That was more in keeping with what I wanted to do, because at least you could keep your clothes on.
So when you arrived here in the UK, What was your first experiences with music? Obviously, you'd experienced it in Barbados through your grandparents, but then when you came here, how did you integrate into some sort of musical outlet while you were in the UK?
Well, my parents had the good sense to bring me here during the summer. I think I came in June, so it wasn't as cold as it was going to get. And I had two younger sisters who had friends, you know, in the local neighborhood. And I lived in Battersea, which was the street that I lived on. At one end was Clapham Common, and the other end was Wandsworth Common. So we were spoilt between which common we could go to and make friends. We actually ended up making friends on both commons, so we decide which common we'd go and play on. And I met older brothers of my sister's friends. And of course, my sisters would boast about me. He could play the guitar, he could play the guitar. And word got out that I could play the guitar, and there was a group at school. The group was called Roadworks Ahead. And they were three boys, a drummer, a bass player, and another guitarist, who were seeking to have a fourth member who could play the guitar and sing. So I thought, yeah, that's me. And I you know, made friends with these lads, and I found out that my guitar skills were a bit more advanced than theirs. So they said, right, you want to be in the group? I was in the group. And from there on...
So at school, obviously you met these individuals, but was there a particular kind of setup at the school at that present time for them to be having a band?
No, it came later. In 1968, our school opened a recording studio. And that recording studio was primarily to record sound effects for the drama group. So the studio belonged to the English department. Well, I was a member of the drama group, so that gave me access to the studio. And when we got in the studio, flipped it on its head and started recording songs. Because on Tuesday mornings, there was a tutorial period where boys of all ages were mixed in tutor groups. And I had the privilege of doing a radio program that went through the school's tannoy for every Tuesday morning. And the radio station was called Radio RVP. RVP because the Royal Victoria Patriotic Hospital was where our school was, on that site where it had been a hospital during the war. In fact, many years later, when a friend told me, oh, I sold that madhouse on Trinity Road, I was like, no, the madhouse wasn't on Trinity Road, it was further down at Tooting Beck. And he went, no. And then he took out old photos of my old school, and I was thinking, my parents never told me. You know, I must have been incarcerated in this place. It was a madhouse, and here I am.
Wasn't that like not post-war for veterans? Is that where
That's right. It was a hospital for war veterans.
Yeah.
But they later on in the 60s turned it into a school.
Yeah.
So, and it was on land that was owned by the Earl Spencer. So the school was called Spencer Park. You know, and we had this recording studio there, and I was in there all the time. In fact, I was very close to the head of music, who let me do pretty much whatever I wanted. So geography, out the window. History, out the window. Science, out the window. Music, full in.
So looking at the music stuff, like with your old man, your dad, him being settling, he had a little sound system, a little sound.
He sure did. It was very noisy. In fact, my mum hated it. His sound system was called Lord Tropical. Lord Tropical, the Tropical Sound Master, anyway. And I grew to like that sound system because it meant that every time Dad was going to play at a party, he would need a bit of muscle. And he'd take me to lift up the boxes and I'd, peep over at the turntable. And then later on, I was able to use the amplifier of his sound system to plug in all my mates and, the bass, the guitars, and then we'd use it as our PA system.
Well, when you're rehearsing and all
yeah,
that?
In the basement of the house where I wasn't allowed out, but all my mates were allowed in.
Yeah. Do you ever select tunes on that, or would he allow you to touch his record collection?
Yeah, because if he was playing at a party or something, and he'd go, "I'll go and take over for an hour or something," while he was probably boozing up.
Like, what kind of tunes was your dad selecting at that time?
It was a cross section of Otis Redding, Wilson Pickett, Booker T and the MGs on one hand, and on the other, Prince Buster, the Pioneers, Toots and the Maytals on the other hand, and then Fela Kuti and groups from West Africa. So he had Ghanaian music, Nigerian music, and he had, music from the Eastern Caribbean, Trinidad, soca. He had, Dad was a connoisseur of music. He even used to do mail order, and he had this catalog, and he would order from America, and then they would just come in the post.
In the last 10 years, I recently discovered Fela Kuti, and it seemed like a little bit of an enigma. You know what I mean, like in that respect. But how was your dad tuning into that at them early days?
Well, see, Dad worked for the transport system, and in the transport system, there were people from all over the world. And he made friends with different people from different places. And then, because there were no nightclubs, per se, to these sort of West Indian, African people could listen to the music they were accustomed to listening to back home, he'd get them. And then when they had a party, they would all, get him to play, because he had a cross-section. And I went to many christenings, weddings, funerals, and each time he was playing, he'd play a different selection. You would know if he was playing for some people that come from Ghana, or if he was playing for some people that came from Nigeria, or some people that came from Mali, because he'd meet all these people whilst at work.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So like in terms of the impact in terms of the sound system which your dad had, was he playing at like Shabines, or was he playing at blues parties? Like, aside from the functions that he was playing?
No, just
the functions.
Blues parties of his friends.
Yeah.
And
that inspired you to set up your own sound.
Yep.
And what was that? How did that come about?
My sound was called Sufferer. A lot of people used to go, "Why are you calling yourself that?" We're going, because we are the sound of the sufferers. We play music for the sufferers, right? And we would do crazy things like, "This is a free dance, but you have to pay to leave." It's like, you can't enforce that. Oh yeah, you see the size of that bouncer there? You try and get past him, right, and not pay your £1 to go home.
Am I right in thinking sometimes you would be playing like double gigs, so you'd start off early and then you'd be playing later night things?
Yeah, we were 7 nights a week on the road in clubs around London and, Birmingham, Manchester, Bristol. We were all over. I mean, we bought this van from London Transport, an old diesel van that we made the mistake of putting petrol in one night. and we were traveling all over the UK with the sound system and my group, which was called Matumbi then. And I had a mixing desk. And we plugged the group into the mixing desk and then plugged the output of the mixing desk into the sound system, which earned us criticism for people going, "Nah, they were miming." And what do you mean miming? Going, well, how comes the sound was coming through the speaker boxes of the sound system? And I'd say, "Come here, see that? It's a mixing desk. You've never seen one before, but we've got one. And we plug into that, and then the output is what you're hearing through. Or see, sound systems would set up their sound system all around the room. It was not on the front of the stage and blasting forward. It was all around the room. So to hearing the sound coming through the speaker boxes, I guess someone could think, no, they're miming. That's not them. That's a record.
So well, not recently, but maybe about a year ago, we interviewed Lloyd Coxon.
Ah, my brethren.
Your brethren, your neighbour.
Well,
tell us a little bit of link up on that.
Well, Lloyd Coxon was responsible for my introduction into the recording world in the UK because he wanted to do a reggae version of a song called Caught You in a Lie by Robert Parker. Now, that song was famous for Coxon's sound because whenever he put up his sound system, the first record he would play would be that. So people knew him for that song. It was an R&B song, and it was on pre-release, it was an import. So not many people had a copy of that. And because he'd made that song famous, playing it on his sound system, he wanted to take it a step further and do a reggae version. And he discovered this young lady who had been singing on my sound system, a young lady by the name of Louisa Mark. And he said, I want to do this with her, right? Because she was making a stir on the sound systems. So we went into the studio, and I ended up playing the bass, the guitar, the keyboards, the synthesizer, everything except for the drums. And so I became a close friend of his, because when that record came out, it sailed to the top of the UK charts. And this was a sound system that their motto was, we don't play English records. So in playing that, he was eating his own humble pie. He, was eating his words. And he didn't tell people that it was actually me that had engineered it all. It would just say Coxon. And, because he was famous for playing imports, a lot of people thought it was an import. And I, hid under its umbrella until time came for me to go, you know what, that was me. I can do it again. I can do it for myself.
Do you think that was kind of the precursor to Lovers Rock? Obviously,
that was, in fact, Lovers Rock, because before that, sound systems would say in the dance, just to give a heads up on what the next record was, if it was a slow dancer, or, go, this is Lovers Rock. And so when I told Dennis Harris about that, he said, well, I'm going to make a record label and call it Lovers Rock. And he did.
But where did that name, I know that they would say it on the MCs and stuff, but where did that name come from?
Well, I think it was because Augustus Pablo had a song. That song was on the Santic record label, and that song's title was Lovers Rock. So the two words seemed to gel together, and and it was like a new genre, and it was meant to describe reggae that was made in London, because there was a stigma. People would be against English reggae because I'll tell you, some of the sounds selected by the engineers at that time were a bit thin. So knowing that the Jamaican sound was big and fat and heavy, and having a sound system myself, that stood me in good stead, because when I was in the studio, I could hear the sound that would be reproduced by the sound system and select that frequency. So when we were looking for a name for what it was that we were doing, the two words Lovers Rock seemed to fit it admirably. And so it was born.
And just like rewinding a little bit, so going back to Mutumbi, in terms of UK reggae, you were were you the forefront of that? I know there was a lot which came within the 80s, but were you the forefront to that movement?
Yes, in 1971, we had the good fortune that the great crooner, Pat Kelly, who had a record in the charts at that time, one of the only reggae tunes in the charts, a song called How Long? And he had this kind of falsetto that was like, he only ever sang, "Oh, yeah, oh." And he was a bit of a phenomenon. And so, because we had an agent who decided that he had double booked Pat Kelly, and one gig was, I don't know, Durham, and the other gig was supposed to be in Brighton. So he said, look, Pat's not going to do the Brighton gig. He's going to Durham. So you lot and me, we're going to be Pat Kelly for the night in Brighton. So he's like, oh, this is a bit risque. And then when we arrived at the gig in Brighton, Pat Kelly turned up. And it's like, and then the two of them had a night and said, no, I told you to go to Durham. No, I told you. And then he said, all right, Matumbi, this is not your fault. I actually want to work with you guys. But him, the agent, is sacked, right? And so Pat contacted us and we became his backing band. Well, on the back of that, Johnny Clark came to London in 1973 and was told, the band you want is Matumbi. So we backed him. Then Ken Booth came and the same thing happened. So we were like backing most of the singers that came from Jamaica without a band. And we were hated by bands in Jamaica because one of them said to me, if it weren't for you lot, we would have made it to London, But because Lloyd Chalmers, who was the producer of that Everything I Own, Ken Booth, he said, we don't need you guys. We got a band in London. So lots of singers were coming without the band. And then a rapper, or as we call him, a toaster, a man who spoke on record, by the name of Iroy. He came to London and said, right, I want to do something different with you lot, because before that, rappers would come with a sound system and rap on the B side of their record. And he wanted to take it further, so to have a live band so we could play the dub bit and then he do the, and we became quite good at making live dub on stage. And so out of all of that, Lloydie Coxon came and said, come on, we're going to get in the studio, caught you in a lie.
Where did the name Matumbi come from?
Whilst I was studying O-level English at school, we had the chance first to read about Africa. And there was a novel by the novelist Joyce Carey, right? And this novel was called Mr. Johnson. And we had that for O-level English. And in that book, Mr. Johnson was a clerk in the British Army in Nigeria, and his boss was a man called Sergeant Gollop. Now, the description of Sergeant Gollop's girlfriend, who was Nigerian, was like she was the most beautiful woman on the planet. And her name was Matumbi. So when we were searching for an African-sounding name for our band, of course I said Matumbi. And everybody, not knowing what it meant, said, that sounds good, Matumbi. And later on, I found out that it actually meant reborn. And so we were rebirthing ourselves as Africans in the UK. And there was a group called Osibisa. There were lots of groups were seeking African names. So we had one.
And where were you recording this stuff at the time?
Well, I met a man called Peter Horton who had a recording studio in the West End. And one day, my friend Nick Straker, to this day, my younger sister still refers to him as Ginger, because he had bright red ginger hair, and we wrote a song in his house one day, and decided we should record this. And so we've thumbing through the yellow pages, calling studios. You got time for us to record? No. And then one studio said, yeah, come down. And this studio was called Gooseberry. And it was in Chinatown, in Soho, in West End. We went there, and when we got there, he said, where's the band? And the two of us said, we are the band. So I played drums, and Nick played keyboards, piano, and then I played guitar, and he played organ, and then, I sang the whole thing and did all the backing vocals. And Peter was knocked out that just two of us had a band sound. And then he asked if we were interested in helping him to do music for his poetry, because he thought to be a poet. And so I said, yeah, we'll do it. And then that studio became our house of music, because knowing that we were recording there and getting the sounds that we did, other people, musicians, wanted to sound like that, like the Jamaican sound, the fatness of the bass and, the whole thing. So I became a sound engineer at that studio for many years. And my other sound engineer, a guy called Mark Lusardi, you might have heard of his famous sister. And we, tuned the studio to be a reggae studio, even though Labby Sifri and people like that were recording there.
You say that you obviously had two band members at the time, but how did you build on that in terms of... Because you obviously had more band members later on, yeah.
What happened was that we decided to form a strictly reggae band. And it was thought of as professional suicide, because nobody wanted to book a reggae-only band. You had to play a bit of, blues, a bit of jazz, a bit of pop, mix it if you were going to be playing for a crowd. And in fact, our first gig was in Alconbury at a US and British joint Air Force base, when the Americans had lots of air bases over here. And this one in Alconbury, we went there and they told us, don't play any reggae. These boys are American, right? They want to hear Sam and Dave. They want to hear Otis Redding. They don't know reggae. So we said, okay. We went there, and the first tune we played was a Booker T and the MGs tune. And then the next tune was Toots and the Maytals. 5446 was my number. Stick it up, mister. And they were all looking at the side like, what's this? So we quickly said, this is reggae. And this is how you dance to it.
How long did you have that residence?
We played there every month for about a year. And we were told, now, you got away with that in the non-commission. When you go to the officers' mess, because it was like 2 gigs a night, you played the non-commission and then you play the officers' mess, right? When you go to the officers' mess, don't do that. Play all your soul tunes. We did it again. And then, people like, hey, you guys, what's this sound? Is this music from the islands? I go, yeah. And this is how you dance to it, showing them the old rub-a-dub. So, of course they liked it. Man. Ooh, rub-a-dub, yeah, like that, man. Ooh, with your partner, and then, whoa. Don't know if we can do that with the female officers, but we'll certainly give it a try.
So, did you guys have the opportunity to get signed with Matumbi?
Yeah. Our first record deal was with a company called Trojan. And Trojan Records were the reggae label at the time. I mean, Dandy Livingstone, Suzanne, beware of the devil, them kind of tunes there. What other Dandy Livingstone tune? I mean, in Pat Kelly, lots of the Upsetters, right? All the reggae tunes that ever went into the UK charts, right, were released on Trojan Records. So we thought, if we want to get in there, we've got to go to that record company. We went there, and they gave us a deal. We were to receive, 7 members of the band were to receive 3% of 90% of the wholesale selling price, which was sod all. But we took that for a while until we got fed up with them and decided that we were going to use Gooseberry Studios to record our own stuff, and recorded a song called After Tonight, and that was hugely received. And so we thought, Trojan, bye-bye.
And just going back to the sound systems, so, because obviously you wear many hats as an individual through that time. You had the producer, you had the Matumbi in the band, and then you had the sound system.
Yeah.
Who was your biggest rivals at the time?
Coxon. Of course, Lloydie Coxon was the top sound. If you had as much music as him, or you could beat him in a competition, you would take over the top spot. He refused to play with Sufferer. He said to me one night, he said, I spent years building my name as Sir Coxon. Why should I come and gamble it with you in one night for £100? It's better if we don't meet. But I've got an idea, we should do productions together in the studio. So that pleased me. I was like, okay.
I heard you had a little rival with a certain Count Shelley as well.
Yeah. Count Shelley, well, they were the big 4 sound systems. Coxon, Duke Reid, Count Shelley, and Neville the Enchanter. Now, Count Shelley thought he'd teach us a lesson. So he said, yeah, Sufferer, come. He was playing at a club called the Four Aces. So we went down there to, have it out with him. And first thing we did, we had to take off the door of the club to get one of our speaker boxes inside. And Newton Dunbar, the owner of the club, was not happy, about us taking off his front door to bring this massive... And this speaker box had 8 18-inch speakers in it. And we used to call it the cow. And it belched out sound. So when we got in the Four Aces, we put it facing where Count Shelley's sound was. And, old valve amps, right? The amount of noise we made must have destabilized his amplifier, because after a while he said, Sufferer, you play for the rest of the night. I'm signing off. And that would be seen to be defeat. If a sound decides, right, I'm off, there's 2 of us supposed to be playing, but you're the man, go ahead. And so that gave us the impetus to go ahead to think, yeah, we've conquered Count Shelley, now bring Duke Reid and Fat Man and Neville the Enchanter, we'll have them all. Because I knew Coxon wasn't going to play with us, right? But, the number 2, 3, and 4, we were going to annihilate them so that we became at least the number 2 sound in the UK.
Didn't you re-edit one of Count Shelley's tunes, though?
How do you know that?
Yeah, I've been listening. I've been looking.
Dude, Count Shelley had a record. It was called Sweet Africa. And the singer of that record is a man called Gene Rondo. Now, with what I knew in the studio and what I'd read Sir George Martin talking about when he was recording the Beatles, I hit upon the idea of making loops. They do it now and call it sampling. Well, I sampled a record that was number 1 in the charts and made another tune of it. Right, this tune, Young, Gifted and Black, took a section of it and recorded Guantanamero, Guantanamero, ba-da-da-da-da-da-da, out of a section of that tune. And a teacher who played trombone played, and another teacher who played flute played. And in fact, I ended up parting with that record for a sound called Jim Daddy for the pricely sum of £3. And So I did it again using Gene Rondo's Sweet Africa and made a dub plate for my sound and retitled it Sweet Africa. So when we were playing with Shelley, and that Shelley was the producer of that tune, when we were playing with Shelley, I thought, yeah, put it on. He was stunned. He was like, where you get that? And to this day, he's passed now, I never told him how we came by that because the song was just 2 chords. So if I found the intro, the loop to make where I could sing the whole tune, albeit with different lyrics for my sound, on there, and people were astounded. It was like, how did you get Count Shelley rhythm? I was like, I know people.
So this was 1974?
74.
Looping.
Yeah.
Wow. So you talked about the upsetters when you were talking about Trojan, yeah? Mm-hmm. Did you ever have a connection with Lee Scratch Perry?
Yeah. In fact, in 73, he was due, his wife was due to be the MC of a show that we were doing in Battersea Town Hall. She came on, we were playing with an artist called I-Roy. Now there's another famous artist in Jamaica called U-Roy. She came out and went, ladies and gentlemen, I give you U-Roy. I-Roy was pissed. In fact, I can't repeat what he said at the time. Not in public anyway. And he refused to come out until she went back and corrected herself. During the show, Lee Perry wanders onto the stage and all the audience, knowing who he was, went mental. And everybody thought he could play the keyboard. So he wanders over to our keyboard player, shoves him off the keyboard and goes, playing absolutely nothing. But the audience went ape. In fact, he was very lucky because a man called Castor Brown stopped the keyboard player from actually punching him for shoving him off the keyboard, right? Anyway, as time went on and on and on, I met him again with, I did a tour with him with Max Romeo and, let me see, another group, Row, Fisherman, row, da, 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 da. Yes, the Congos, right? And, well said that, man. I had a senior moment then. And he then wanted to change his production people because he'd been working with Adrian Sherwood, who's a friend, and the Mad Professor, who was another friend. And he wanted to offend them two by coming to work with me. Only I smelt the rat. And when he was talking to me about, yeah, I'm going to, Bovell, you is the Bovell. You come to break the spell. And the spell was like, those two had made lots of records with him. And I was like, well, Lee, I don't know. You should stay with Adrian Sherwood. Because he's had the most success out of you as a solo artist. What am I going to do? Or you should stay with Mad Professor because he's made the albums with you as a solo artist. What are you calling me in there for? Right? Anyway, as I was on my way to Adrian Sherwood's house, Lee Perry's wife is on the phone to me, telling me, yeah, you got to do this record, blah, blah. And I roll up at Adrian's front door. Ding dong. He's going, right, then come in. You'll never guess who I've got on the phone. I go, Murray Perry. And he goes, don't want to speak to her. And I go, yes, I'm just arriving at Adrian's house. In fact, here's Adrian now. Put him on the spot. So him and I were doing an album with Madness. He was to do half of the album. I was to do the other half of the album. When I'd done my first half of the album, it was at a studio in Wood Green, right, where Adrian had said, I said, where are you going to do your half of the album? He went, Wood Green. I went, okay, good. I'm going to do my first half of the album in Wood Green because we're going to have, you know, a similar kind of sound working on the same desk and all that. And Adrian said, fine. So once I'd done my half, Madness turned to me and said, actually, we don't want Adrian anymore. We want you to finish the whole album. I was like, oh, no. He's my mate, and the only reason that I'm in this studio is because he told me to go there. How am I going to face Adrian? So when I was doing Lee Perry in that same studio, I invited Adrian to come down. He only lived up the road. And whilst he was out of the studio, we were recording a new version to Sun is Shining and another version to Kaya. Lee Perry said, Bob Marley didn't write that. I wrote it. It's my song, and I'm going to do a version now, but I'm changing one word. He's going, what's that word you're changing? He's going, got to have Kaya now. Got to have Kaya now. Got to have Kaya now, 'cause the rain is coming. The original word was, 'cause the rain is falling. You go, no, the rain ain't come yet. 'Cause the rain is coming. So we thought, all right, you're the boss. You're Lee Perry. We'll sing 'Cause the rain is coming. And I had Janet Kay and Carol Thompson singing backing vocals. As we set up to record, there was an almighty thunder crash outside. He leaned over to me and went, you record that? And as is my policy, when I'm sitting behind the engineer's desk, I'm always in record. Because you catch the most uncanny things, you know, and you can stash them. So we were in a soundproof room, to all intents and purposes. We shouldn't have heard that boom outside, but we did, and I was in recording. You get that? I'm going, yeah. He's going, carry on. Right, so 20 minutes later, the rain, pissed down. And Adrian came back to the studio and went, what's going on? I was going, he done that. Because he said, the rain is coming. And then the rain came, and Wood Green was flooded. So I was like, I mean, lots of people always thought of him as a bit of a wizard. So I was like, he done that, right? And then he went, anybody got a saucepan? And why? He was catching the rain, drinking it, and sprinkling it on people's heads. And I'm going, we're in a recording studio, there's electricity, you can't be doing that. I mean, we're working on a £100,000 recording desk, right? It's SSL. You can't be flicking water around. He's going, don't worry, everything all right. You know? And when Adrian came back and said, what's going on? Because the weather suddenly just changed. I said, your mate's done that. You know? And then when we finished the session, Lee turned to me and said, hey, you can keep that so till when me dead, because it's going to be worth more money. And I turned to him and said, well, mate, I don't think that record's ever going to come out because you are immortal. You're going to live forever. And he went, and then when he passed away, I found myself playing at a club in Shepherd's Bush somewhere, and I got word that he'd passed, and I unfolded my dub bag and went, this record was made with Lee Perry. He told me I could release it when he's dead. He died today, but I'm not going to release it. And I played it, and the audience went, Matt, I'll play some of that tonight.
Right. So I'm going to just drop saying, one night in Birmingham.
Birmingham.
Yeah. You went up to Birmingham, judging.
Oh. I think, what's he found out that I've done in Birmingham? Not guilty. Or no comment. Yeah. Well, what happened was I was invited to be a judge in a talent competition in Handsworth. And I got to tell you that on the way there, good old British Rail, me and my mates sat in the first class. Then the conductor comes and goes, tickets, and we're playing a game of dominoes. Hand him the tickets without looking at him. We're playing dominoes. And he goes, oi, you can't stay here with that ticket. And I respond, he goes, you can't stay here with this ticket. I respond again, and ignore him. He says, bloody foreigners, and walks off, right? When we get to New Street, and we're safely out of the train, go, all right, mate. Anyway, that was the beginning of that evening. During the competition, a group came on playing a song. Handsworth Revolution, Handsworth. I thought, Jesus, these are the winners. We're in the middle of Handsworth. If we don't say that they won, we won't get out of here alive. Never mind that they were great anyway. So we voted Steel Pulse. And first prize was a day in the studio with moi. So I took them in the studio and recorded their first recording and produced about the first 3 records they made before Mr. Chris Blackwell decided he wanted to sign them. And they went, sorry, then, we're getting money here.
That was on Island Records.
Island Records. They went and signed to Island Records. And in fact, to this day now, I have a new group that's yet to be unleashed on the British public, and it's the first reggae supergroup. And it's David Hines from Steel Pulse, Brinsley Ford from Aswad, and yours truly from Matumbi. And we recorded our first single already, but we haven't finished our album yet, but it is to come.
You mentioned Aswad there. Where did they come in the timeline in comparison to Matumbi? Were they after?
Aswad came after Matumbi, but they were the first young London band to have a major recording deal with Island Records, you know, because when Matumbi was signed to Trojan wasn't really a major record company, although it was responsible for a lot of the reggae hits, you know. But Aswad, when they signed to Island, because Island was a bigger record company than Trojan, in fact, the two of them started life together. Chris Blackwell had shares in Trojan, and he owned Island. In fact, he told me himself that when he decided to get out of that deal and just take Island, you know, to record whatever he wanted and not what he was being forced to release because it had been a hit in Jamaica. And he took Jimmy Cliff with him because he believed that Jimmy Cliff was going to be the next big thing. In fact, it wasn't to be, even though Jimmy Cliff had lots of hits. Bob Marley came along and took the #1 spot.
But were you collaborating with other bands as well? Were you, obviously, because you're a producer, obviously.
Yeah.
What was the collaborations with Aswad way back when?
Aswad had a drummer by the name of Angus Gay. He, I thought, showed the most promise as a young British drummer. In fact, in 1978, I called him to the studio to record a song that I'd written and that I had designed. I was going to produce this record. I got him in, and I had a drum pattern that I could play for 10 seconds, but I couldn't play that pattern for 4 minutes. He was a drummer. So I got him in the studio and said, listen, I've got this pattern. It's not a reggae pattern, because on the hi-hat, I was doing calypso sort of Ghanaian thing, you know, where the hi-hat was leading. And then on the snare, I had the Afro beat after snare, like that. And then on the kick drum, I had 4 to the floor, disco, do, 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 do. And it was an odd mixture of rhythm. And when I gave him the idea, he said, give me that, I'll play it now. And so he got behind the drums and amazed me with the, you know, how well he played it. And so I recorded the song. At the beginning of the recording, he didn't know the melody. So how I could explain what I was doing to him was, now, when the bass plays a slow motion, that's the verse. And when the bass plays fast, like a heartbeat raising, that's the chorus. And because I was the bass player and the sound engineer, I couldn't talk to him, I couldn't sing whilst I was playing the bass. So I, you know, talked to him that way. And when we finished the first recording, I said, hey, it sounds good, but can we do one more? And he went to do when we did the second one, at one point, he came across like Bill Bruford or Phil Collins. Like, I was like, what are you doing? I wanted you to play that beat straight. And then a mind said, listen to it again. And I listened to it again and I said to him, drummer, I'm not going to pay you for this. I'm going to give you 10% of whatever this tune makes for life. The song was a song called Silly Games. I got Janet Kay to sing it, and the rest is our story.
And was there any other projects that you worked with Aswad members as well, like in terms of movies? And
yeah, when I did the soundtrack for a film called Babylon, I realized that in the script, they had written a kind of group clash, because if I had used Matumbi to do my part of the soundtrack, Aswad were going to be in the soundtrack anyway because their singer was the protagonist. He was the star of that, you know, Brisley Ford was the star of the film Babylon. So I refused to write music for him to sing because I thought, why am I doing that? He's got a group and, you know, you guys go. Only because I'd read in the script, there was a part where the sound system guy goes to Brixton to buy a dub plate. When he gets there, the guy called Fat Larry, who was a bit of a skanker, plays him this old sounding tune, and he's going, this is pre-release, man, pre-release. And the guy goes, so when it release? Pre-war? And that was a tune. If that tune was made by Matumbi, it would have been seen to do that an Aswad tune toppled a Matumbi tune. But because I'd used Aswad players to play that tune, it was nothing, you know. And then the members of Matumbi realized that I had short-circuited this group clash thing. And I used the members of Aswad to play my section of the soundtrack.
And what kind of cultural impact do you think Babylon as a movie had on the UK at the time in the 1980s?
Mate, I was annoyed that they made it an X. Because we thought, young kids should see this. But when I got older and became a dad and started looking back at the footage, I thought, Jesus, there's an awful lot of ganja being smoked in this. I'm glad my kid's not seeing that, you know. And in fact, when we went to C.A.N Film Festival on its preview at the C.A.N Film Festival, I had to leave the room because, you know, they translated a lot of the patois wrong. You know, for instance, when the character that plays Beefy says "Bomboclat," the screen it came, idiots. And I was like, no, it doesn't mean that. But I suppose an idiot could be a bomb buckler.
So how did someone like Franco, is it Franco Rosso?
Franco Rosso.
Why was he making films like that at the time?
Well, he had this idea, he had this script, right? And him and, I'll remember his name in a minute, because this was the guy who had just released the film Quadrophenia, right? And they had an idea to do this Babylon thing. So I was working with Franco, and he was doing a documentary on Linton Kwesi Johnson. And it was up at the time where Maggie was vying for power. So one night when we were sat to watch this documentary, all of a sudden we heard, there now follows a Conservative Party broadcast, and they'd taken our movie off. Because it was thought if anyone's seen that movie, no one would vote Conservative. And so Dread, Beat and Blood was the name of the movie, and the director was Franco. And so when he had the idea to do Babylon, he said to Linton, do you fancy writing some music for this? And Linton said, ain't my job. Bovell's the music, man. I write lyrics, right? And he just gave me the opportunity to do that.
What was the process of writing that score for Babylon? How did you kind of approach it?
I was given a VCR, and at those times they were rare. A video recorder? Now nobody knows what it looks like. But I was given a video recorder where they would go out and film the rushes and bring them back and play them to me in the studio. And so I was writing to the movement of the artists, the actors, and, getting a vibe for what the movie, what reggae I would do, what blues, jazz, how I would mix the thing, and attacked it that way.
What, in terms of like you looked at each different character?
Yeah. And I wrote a song, some music for each character, so that when that character was on the screen, you could hear the music in the background somewhere, all except for the song Warrior Charge, which Aswad had played to me and said, what do you think about that? I went, yeah, it's in.
Obviously.
Yeah, mate, I was like, I wish I wrote that.
So in terms of, you mentioned Linton Kwesi Johnson. How did that come about in terms of the link up with him? When was the first interactions that you had with him back in the day?
Well, Matumbi had earned itself the name of a great reggae band in London, right? And there's that same club, the Four Aces, where Count Shelley was the resident sound. They were obliged to have live music on Sunday nights. So they had people who had been on Opportunity Knocks. I mean, there was this group that was on Opportunity Knocks. I really wanted to see them live. And when they came on, after the second record, you'd hear, boo, boo, off, 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 sound system, sound system. And then the sound system was obliged to play. So Matumbi was being forced to play that club on such a hostile crowd. We availed ourselves of all the latest Dennis Brown, the latest Gregory Isaacs, the latest Burning Spear, songs that people would only be hearing on the sound system because they were not yet released. And we were doing them on stage live and doing dub bits to it. Well, after the first gig, nobody clapped, but nobody booed. And that was more important, that we managed to get through the whole set and then walk off the stage without a murmur such as a boo or, get off, get off. And so Linton, when he was a journalist at that point, working for, I think it was the BBC. The BBC, he had a program on the BBC World Service, and he wanted to interview Matumbi. And the rest of the band said, you talk to him then. So after the interview, he said, I write poetry. And I went, yeah, I know who you are. And he said, I'm thinking about putting music with my poetry. So I said, whenever you're ready, holler at me. And so he did about 2 or 3 years later and said, I got some time in the studio this weekend. What can we do? And so we went in the studio and recorded his first album, Dread, Beat and Blood. And we've been in the studio together this last 45 years.
It was like an impressive thing that I saw where in his poetry, he tried to replicate the dub sound through his vocal, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So it was like blood, 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 fire, fire,
Well,
fire.
that was his first book, right? It was called Voices of the Living and the Dead. So when I read that, it was like blood, 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 fire, 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 blood, for 2 pages. And I was like, this guy's trying to write in dub. So when I met him and asked him, yeah, were you? He went, yeah. So that's not him now, is it? He likes to keep track of me.
But you were producing under a completely different alias. So you had quite a few different aliases.
Yeah. Well, that was because I wanted to know if it was what I was doing or if it was just my name that made things popular. So I would change my name occasionally. I mean, I was one time African Stone, then I was Dennis Matumbi, then I became the 4th Street Orchestra, trying to put people off my scent, you know, and proving that reggae could be made in the UK and could stand up against its Jamaican counterpart. And if people were not pre-told that it was recorded in the UK, all that they could go on would be the sound, whether it sounded good, whether they liked it or not. Not because, you see, made in England, right, that would prejudice the record, you know. And another thing that would prejudice the record would be that records made in England had a tiny little hole in the middle. Imports had a big, fat, juicy hole in the middle. So you would know whether that come from Jamaica, big, fat hole. If it came from the US, big, fat hole. You need an adapter to play that. So we availed ourselves of a machine called the dinking machine. We press our records in Dublin, bring them in so we wouldn't have to pay taxes on them, and then dink a big fat hole in the middle and proclaim them imports. It worked.
No, that was a hustle right there, yeah?
Well, yeah,
nice
I mean, you know, it's, you know, selling your wares.
Going back to the Linton Kwesi Johnson, so you were touring with him, or you have been touring with him for 45
for many years.
How was his music kind of accepted in America? Because obviously he kind
All
of
over the world.
had a big wave internationally.
All over the world. In fact, one of my most memorable times with him, we went to Iceland, Reykjavik. It was freezing cold. And the ground looked like we landed on the moon. No grass, it was just pep rocks. And at that time, Reagan and Gorbachev were meeting in Reykjavik. Lyndon comes on and goes, I heard that Gorbachev and Reagan are here. I'll come along and see what they're up to. No, I was going to say, I mean, another time we're in Seattle. And now Seattle is the birthplace of Jimi Hendrix. Of course we wanted to go there. And we're playing upstairs of a Chinese restaurant. While we're sound checking, the owner, this lady, comes and goes, why are all my customers outside? And we go, because we're doing a sound check and they're, you know, patiently waiting to be let in. She looks at us and said, I don't care about you. You can take your music and go. Let the customers in. And Lyndon's on the microphone going, hysterical management, 1, 2, hysterical management. I met a guy in Slovenia who told me, I've seen you and Linton play. I said, where? He said, Seattle. And I said, was it upstairs of a Chinese restaurant? He went, yeah, do you remember the gig? And I then tell him the story about the hysterical management.
What was the musical chemistry between, or is still the musical chemistry between you and Linton Kwesi Johnson, in terms of like, you obviously were making the music, he was putting the bars on, but did that ever change? Did that ever exchange in terms of you taking different roles in that process?
Well, yeah, sometimes I would be the spare guitarist or the spare keyboard player, or, you know, if things weren't going according to what he imagined, because we'd enter the studio with 2 drummers, 2 bass players, two of everything, and then we would bench some musicians and go, now you step down, not, you know. So they had to really prove that they were up to it and play in order to, you know, make the recording.
Well, these were like his mates, or
Yeah.
he was bringing them through.
It was his mates.
Yeah.
And in fact, he didn't let me tell him what musicians we ought to be using until we did an album called Making History. And I said to him, look, I've got a guitar player that's really good. He goes, is he better than you? I go, yeah, sadly. And when the guitar player came and started playing, he went, leaned over to me and went, bloody hell, he's much better than you. So I was like, I told you, man. You know.
So obviously, like, your music reaches far afield. What's like the furthest place where you wouldn't have expected to get a collaboration from in terms of international?
Wow. I don't know. Probably London. Because at one point during the punk period, Chris Backwell contacted me and he said, I've got a group I've just signed. 3 young girls. They're going to be Britain's premier female punk band. And I want you to see what you could do with them. So I said, okay, let me hear the demos. And I said, yeah, I'm going to do that. The group, when I went to meet them the first time, they thought Dennis Brown was coming. The name of that group is The Slits. And I engineered and produced and arranged their first album.
What was that process like? Was there a change in terms of how you would approach it because it was a different type of genre, or?
Well, can you imagine trying to contain 3 young girls who were wild as hell? I mean, for instance, I would work in the morning until 6 or 7 with them and then go to London to work with Linton while they were sent to bed. And
Who was sending them to bed?
me, I'm the producer. I was in charge of the whole production. So at 6 o'clock, I'd go on, girls, that's it for the day. And Ari up, she said to me one day, you're not working on my material when I'm not there. So I said, I'm not going to be here either, right? And so they were determined not to let me play anything on that record because people had been saying, oh, they can't really play, you know, they toured with The Clash and people were saying, you know, they can't really play. Let's see what Bovell does with them. So one day when they were looking for an acoustic sound, I took the guitar and played something. I thought it sounded a bit Segovia. And Viv Albertine started crying. I said, what's wrong with you? She said, no one's ever going to believe that I played that. And I thought, yeah, you're right. Rub it off. And the engineer was going, what? Rub that off? I'm going, yeah, rub it off. Viv, get in the studio and do whatever you want to do, but think about what I just played. And so when she came up with the goods, it was like, bang. They let me play piano on Typical Girls. You know, what else did I do? There's a song called Newtown. And the lyrics goes, Newtown, where everyone goes around taking televigina or playing footballina. Newtown, Newtown, Newtown. Right? And I said, I think I'm going to put some percussion on here. They went, oh yeah. And I armed myself with an ashtray, a spoon, and a box of matches. So occasionally I go with the box of matches, occasionally taking one out and going, and hitting the ashtray with the spoon. Ding, ding, ding. Which, for me, replicated heroin taking, a spoon with a hole in the middle. And they stood there like that. And to this day, when I hear that tune again, I'm like, yeah, I did that. And they let me. Also, there was a tune called Shoplifting. And it ended up with, do a runner, right? But they made the mistake of saying, Mr. Packy won't miss much, and we'll have dinner tonight. Do it. And I said, hey, that word is not going to be used on my production. Packy. That ain't happening on my watch. So I suggested that they used Babylonian. So, Babylonian won't miss much, and we'll have supper tonight. Do it, runner. And then Ari screams, ah! Right? And at one time she screamed, she went, I pissed in my knickers. So I thought, yeah, we'll have that in. You're punks.
Did you ever do any covers with the Slits? Did you ever?
No, that was Adrian Sherwood that did The Man Next Door.
Right, okay.
And in fact, I've just redone that with Max Romeo, and it's just about to come out, The Man Next Door. Max Romeo.
So I was reading up on a little collab in Japan.
Oh.
Yeah. How did that come about? Like, how did that actually
Well,
come on your lap?
Ruchi Sakamoto, rest in peace, brother. He met Don Letts in Tokyo when Don Letts was there with The Clash. He said to Don, you know Dennis Bovell? Don's like, yeah, he's my mate. Can give me his telephone number. So Don came back to London and said, hey, I just met Ruchi Sakamoto. And of course I knew who Ruchi Sakamoto is. I mean, And his group was called Yellow Magic Orchestra. And I thought, what, he wants to meet me? I want to meet him. And he said, yeah, he wanted your telephone number. I said, give it to him. He went, oh, I'm glad you said that, because I already did.
Like going from one legend to the next, a particular Nigerian brother.
Fela Kuti.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how did this come about, linking up with my man?
I'd signed a deal with EMI to be a house producer. So they would look for acts for me to produce. I told them I found an act called UB40. They went, nah. I found another act called The Beat. They went, nah. So I was like, well, you're not recording anyone that I tell you that I want to. And then they said, listen, Fela Kuti's coming to London, and we want him to work with you. I was like, okay. They sent me to Amsterdam, of all places, and to record live in Amsterdam, Fela Kuti, Movement of the People. I was the engineer, recorded it. The lighting engineer, though, was a bit of a pain. He was one of them Hell's Angels that worked for the Rolling Stones. And so the electricity in the building was not what it ought to have been. So sometimes when he pulled some lights, you would get buzzing on the PA system. And I was like, mate, don't do that. Just put the lights on and leave it, because I'm recording and all your is going all over my recording. He didn't hear. He did it anyway. I mean, when you see a guy with an eye patch and a gun in his waist, you don't argue with him. So when we went back to London to do the mix, I used noise gates, things to filter out the sound, but I couldn't filter that buzz off of the bass track. Fella was mad, right? I can't repeat what he said. And then in fear of the whole project going belly up, I said, don't worry, I'll replay that bass line for you. He went, you play the bass? I said, yeah, I've done it once or twice. Put the track on, I played the whole bass line for 45 minutes. He was like this all the time. Right?
Because the track is 45 minutes.
It is, yeah. Then when the record comes out now, it says bass, Dennis Bovell. I'm like, I didn't do it for that. I was doing it to save the day. He goes, no, people have to know that you played that. So I'm like, okay, because lots of friends said to me, how did you play the bass and you were the sound engineer at a live gig? I'm going, well, the bass was an overdub afterwards, you know. And so I got that credit. I'm very glad he gave me that credit, because when I tell people I did that, they go, liar. You know, and fella was so taken to me that he stayed in my studio for 3 months, every day, until it came to Christmas Eve. And he looked at me like usual, what time do we start tomorrow? And I said, fella, tomorrow is Christmas. And he looked at me with a blank stare and went, Christmas? What is it? And I thought, either you don't know or you don't give a monkeys. Let's start at 3 o'clock, because at least I'll miss the speech of the Queen. Everybody's going, you're going to the studio on Christmas Day at 3 p.m. It's like sacrilege, you know. And I turned up at the studio, no one else came. Someone must have got to him in the meantime and said, fella, you know that thing, Jesus and all that, it's Christmas tomorrow. But he obviously didn't know or didn't care. In fact, just recently, there's been a box set of stuff that I did with him, curated by Idris Elba. And that album is in one of the 6 albums. So thanks, Idris.
Big up Idris. I'm conscious of time, because obviously we're opening doors for the late night session
And
at
I
9.
could chat forever.
I know, you're good at it.
Well, 50 years in.
But what I want to do is open the floor for anyone who wants to ask a
Don't
question.
fall through it.
Yeah. Careful. But yeah, like, to open the floor, anyone who wants to ask the question, then be my guest. I will put the mic down and let...
He'll do an Obama. Throw down the mic. There you go. Mic down.
Anyone want to ask any questions?
What sort of outboard gear and mic preamps were you using on the jazz cable?
No.
I sing it when I'm at work.
You do? Can you go?
Yeah.
Mate. Well, I used the Neumann U87.
Nice mic.
Yes. And no compression.
No compression.
No. What you hear there was her standing at the right distance.
Well, like 10 meters.
Yeah, because when she did the high note, I had to go, stand back a bit.
I hide out the pub door when I do it. And sing backwards.
Well, it did remind me of that thing. No. I go, too loud, man, too loud. Would you mind leaving the room? Anybody seen that clip, right? And that was what it was like. In fact, when I hit that high note, Janet went, you can do that? I'm going,
Where did it come from? Where did the high note come from?
it was just an idea I had, you know, because who was it that was doing, there was an advert on TV for Memorex, a cassette tape, and Ella Fitzgerald had belted out this note that broke a glass on the table. And I thought, admirable. If I can get someone to sing a note like that, that would shatter a glass across the room, and that silly game, that was where that was born, you know. And she did well, because when we did the first Top of the Pops, nobody believed that it was her singing, so they made her sing live. And I was like, told you. Yes, I was hovering around in the background with Brinsley Ford is on that as well, playing guitar, and Drummy Zeb Aswad on the drums, and John Kapai, the guitarist who I was told would wipe the floor with me. And I said, all right, bring him, I want to hear him play. When he started to play, I was like, I'm never going to be that good, if I be honest. So I said, John, what about you and me forming a band? You play guitar and I'll play bass. And that was in 1975. When I spoke to him 3 weeks ago, he'd fallen down the stairs and broken his ankle. But we're still very much in touch. And he was the guitar player of a group called the Cats, who in 1968, I believe, was one of the first British bands to enter the charts with a scat tune. They'd done a version of Swan Lake. Right, in 1968, and my dad had a copy of that record. So I knew about the Cats from then. So meeting the guy who played guitar in the Cats, and he also played with Dandy Livingstone, Susan, beware of the devil, you know, and tunes like that. So meeting him, and his dad was Nigerian, and his mum was Welsh. So they decided to put him behind Janet. So he's the main focus behind Janet on the Silly Games Top of the Pops. No, no compression, no. Straight into the desk with the U87. What bass was I playing? Fender, Fender Precision. Yeah. That was in 1978. Oh, yes, it was actually. It was a new Precision, but I had to give that up because they're too bloody heavy. Can't jump around the stage with one of them round your neck. Oh, good.
Any other questions? Yeah, go for it.
So you mentioned Babylon. I've seen it a couple of times. Great film.
Thank you.
Did you get Michael Prophet and Yabby You involved in that?
Well, that was courtesy of Aswad's record label. Aswad's manager, a guy called Michael Campbell, they had a label called Grove Music. I mean, it was Aswad's label. And Prophet and Yabby You had released those two tunes on that label, and I'd sequestered them into the soundtrack of the thing, so as not to make it all my music, you know. I wanted a section of what was actually going on as well as my stuff, you know, to make it more believable. So I said, yeah, you know, when I was presiding over what was going to be on the soundtrack, those two had to be included. And in fact, Yabby You was not happy. He didn't want his song, "Deliver me, oh my God, from my enemies." He didn't want his song in a movie that depicted violence. But it went on anyway.
And also, your song "Rowan" is probably one of my favourite songs. What was the inspiration behind that song?
A man called Labby Sifri. He wrote that song, "It Must Be Love, Love, Love." That Madness made a meal out of it, and he made the money. So he had this tune where he said, step, 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 step in. And it was all about the steps. And then a group from Nigeria called the Funkies had another tune that had step, 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 step in. So we're searching for a bit of the chorus that I need and go, row, 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 rowing down the river, step, 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 step in, out into the sea, you know. And it became the thing that I was going to use for that tune. The song was meant to be not Dennis Bovell or not Matumbi. It was going to be a guy called Dennis Matumbi or Dennis Curtis. I don't remember what name I used there. But it became very popular at the time. And recently, when my media person, when I was going to do my own label again and start selling material on a platform called Bandcamp. She said to me, "You should release that tune again." So I was like, "What?" And my granddaughter, my eldest granddaughter, said, "Granddad, is that you?" And I went, "Yeah." She said, "I like that tune. I didn't know it was you, though." So I thought, that's 2 reasons why it should come out again. And I went to Canada to work with some people who had been working with Kanye West and the dance troupe, the choreographer. And I was introduced on the stage to a choreographer dancing to Rowing Down the River. And I was like, what? You can make all them moves to my thing. And I was pleasantly surprised and humbled. And so that was another reason why that tune had to come out on my old school label. And it has. Okay.
Any more questions, guys?
Yeah. You mentioned about Hendrix and going to Seattle, and I'm minded that you said that you came to the UK in 1966.
Yeah.
Hendrix appeared on television playing Hey Joe 1967.
Yeah.
Did that have an influence on you seeing?
Of course. What happened was that there was a show called Ready, Steady, Go. And not a lot of people, most of you are probably not old enough to know that show. Kathy McGowan, Ready, Steady, Go. And in fact, 2 days ago, I heard Lulu on telly mentioning the fact that she was on there with that tune Shout, and the Beatles had said that it was their favorite tune at the time, and it boosted her sales. I and my friends used to race home after school to see Ready, Steady, Go. And when they brought Jimi Hendrix on, Hey Joe, I was like that in front of the telly. Wow, the guy's eating the guitar. Eat your heart out, Clapton. You know, eat your heart out, Jeff Beck. Eat your heart out, Hank Marvin. Because he revolutionized the guitar sound and the way he handled it. He treated it with disrespect. It was like, I'll bite your strings off. And then my phone at home was ringing. And my mate Tony Sims said, "Did you see that?" I was like, "Yep, that's the way to go. I want to be able to play guitar like that." And so I attempted to, but then my friend George Pennant one day said to me, Bovell said, "There's only one Jimi Hendrix and it ain't you." I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's going, "You should play reggae." So I have my friend George, rest in peace, George, for insisting that we became a reggae group instead of trying to emulate Jimi Hendrix and all that kind of thing. I quite liked B.B. King as well. That was the style that I was going in that way. That when he said, "Look, man, what other music can you go and dance every tune with a woman?" You got a point there. I'm going to make reggae.
Was there a point where your dad sort of went, okay, being a musician isn't that bad after all?
Yeah, I forced him to. Because I did all my exams. I went to school. I never bunked it at all. I went to school through rain and snow and all that. And I achieved. So as my reward, I was allowed to bring the band into our basement where we set up a recording studio of sorts. And I had keyboards, guitars, bass amplifiers, drums. And my dad was very happy about that because it meant that I wasn't on the street and being bad policeman fodder, And he would ring home occasionally and I'd have to answer the phone, you know, because if I didn't answer the phone, he'd be like, you went out. Because Dad was a bus driver, so he'd be stopping along the route somewhere and phoning to see if I'd gone out. So it suited my purpose to stay at home, bring all my friends round, albeit that if I brought a friend that he didn't take to, he'd go, don't like that kid. Why he's got no manners? You know, don't bring him around anymore. To not have to find an excuse why that person was not allowed in. You know, but yeah, he, by his kind of reverse psychology, made me do what I did, just to prove to him that I could make a living by doing what I wanted to do. You know, I think to this day he's still, you got a decent job yet?
And it relates to the judging in Birmingham. You mentioned Still Pulse. When they performed, did they perform Ku Klux Klan?
No, it hadn't been written yet. That was their tune that they wrote for that competition. Because it was in a club called, in an area called Soho Road, and the club was called Santa Rosa. And you are. You know that.
I'm aware of it. I didn't go.
Okay, because on the site of where it was, there's a huge mosque now. And Cecil, what's Cecil's surname? Who had a radio station called PCRL. He thought of, you know, bringing up this search for a star idea. Live, though. You know, no TV edits and all that. Whatever you saw was what you got right there. And when they come out in Handsworth singing, Handsworth Revolution, the crowd learned it immediately and was shouting Handsworth Revolution. And if any of us had dared to say that they didn't win, I don't think I'd be here now.
We're going to wrap it up because...
Wrap it up. I'll take it.
So obviously we're coming... The night or the evening starts at 9. So we've got half an hour to switch around. But you're welcome to stay if you want to stay. If you want to go and get a drink at the Angel or something like that, then you can do that. Just to give you an insight on the couple of things which are coming up. So the next one we've got is the 5th of May, and we're doing it with Running Circle with an artist called Dean Chu, who's coming all the way from Singapore. So I recommend you guys coming to see it and experience it. We've also got Kofi Stone, who's a hip-hop artist. He's going to be playing end of May. And then we've got a load more. I don't want to announce too many, but we've got a load more. Another thing to put on your radar, 14th of June, Linton Kwesi Johnson is playing at Metronome for Nottingham Poetry Festival. So I recommend going to that, obviously link up, all them kind of things there.
So. Linton's a heavy wordtician, as you may know. In fact, Bruce Smith, who used to be my drummer, who was Nene Cherry's husband, his dad, Hassel Smith, said, you know what I like about Linton? It's like, what? He goes, he never said baby. And he hasn't. He's never gone, baby. And I look through all his lyrics. That don't feature.
But yeah, like definitely look out for that Metronome 14th of June. Thank you for coming to this. Just to let you know, the next episode of Our Yard comes out on International Women's Day. It was done with Valerie V. Rocket, telling an important story of women in sound system culture, as well as a woman called Sherelle, who I work with. She wanted to do that, and she's kind of up and coming within the scene. And then the next one after that will be Mad Professor. So look out for that, and obviously we'll be uploading this brilliant talk.
My boy.
You know what I mean?
Prof.
Yeah,
that's my brethren right there.
That's what I'm saying. So we've got loads of episodes coming out, so keep a lookout for Our Yard UK or at Our Yard UK. Follow that. And like I said, we'll be uploading this conversation as well, so you can see it, and hopefully uploading some of the sets from the night tonight as well. So yeah, definitely check that out, guys. And thank you for coming.
Well, hey.